Nice. It's good to be with Ben and having this conversation. And we're going to talk about business and ministry and marketplace and mission, all those things. Ben, you're a successful business person, and you've done very well for yourself. What does it mean to what is success in business?
So I guess so weird just hanging out on Zoom. We'd much rather be doing this, hanging out in person. I think I think look, breaking down the question is like, what is success through the context of as a Christian, you mean? Or what is, I think at first, like if you're a Christian, you're going into business, in my head, it's sort of,
yeah,
before you even embark on that journey, it's actually about the morality question, which is what is success to you and how do you define it? And then maybe even zooming out is what's Jesus' definition of success in business? So I think the answer would be different depending on the lens in which you answer the question. That's really a non-answer.
So as a Christian, what is success for you?
Yeah, so I think as a Christian, I feel like success is defined as, knowing, developing and deepening our relationship with Jesus in a way that helps us know him more and live more like him, in our day-to-day. And so I would say know and love him more because it's a relationship, and manifest that relationship and the influence he has over your life in your various contexts. So I feel like that's like the Christian approach to life, because I was thinking about this, we were chatting about this the other day, like the unique thing about Christianity is sort of not necessarily a subset of ideas, but actually the fact that our God is a sentient, which is a conscious being that is knowable, that is all powerful and loves us. And so I feel like that has to be the core to when we think about the definition of success as a Christian, it's like a relationship. It's not a set of ideas or a set of practices or processes. So I think in the business context, then it's how do I live in a way that manifests Jesus or the gospel in my business? Or how does my business actually give me more of Jesus and help make others know Jesus more? So I feel like the yardstick is is it forming me more like Jesus? And is it allowing others to be more formed into Jesus through the way we do business?
Yeah, so that's obviously completely different to how non-Christians experience business and success. How do you navigate that between?
It's probably helpful to contrast it, right? Because I feel like that's why I was saying it starts with that first question of what you're looking at when you say, and it may be a good reframing of the question if whoever, I don't know who's listening to this, but if they're planning on going into business, is like when I picture this working out in 3 years' time, what comes into my mind? And in reality, when I started the business, it would have been just lots of clinics or lots of money. That's just how human, so really the worldly definition of success of business is just, does it give you freedom of time or freedom of money? More money. That's usually, oversimplifying it, but it's or more influence and notoriety, those kind of things. But really kind of, I feel like it's really helpful to define my fleshly definition and contrast it against what it should be. Because I feel like you day to day, moment by moment, bounce between the two. And so to answer your second question on navigating it, I feel like it's, how do you navigate it would be, it's owning the fact that you're going to bounce between the two and sort of being comfortable in that liminal place, actually wrestling with the tension between the two and not sort of viewing it as binary. Because there are, I would always actually say it's not even day to day. It's moment by moment. When you're in a good place, sometimes it's I'm driven by this, but I have to repent and come back to this sort of. So I actually get clarity on that and get clarity on this. And then actually develop self-awareness so you can kind of know where you are on that pendulum. And I think a secondary aspect to that is communicating that with your wife or business partner. Because for me, Linda is a huge part of holding me accountable to where I am on that pendulum, And I'm a pretty extreme person. So if I'm here, I'm really bad. And if I'm here, I'm really good. So she brings me, into the center a bit more, I think.
So if your success is about knowing Christ and making him known, then how do you navigate that as a business leader in what you're doing? And how do you actually do that when everything is so driven around the other version, the worldly version of success? And what do you do to navigate that?
Yeah, I think there's so many ways to answer that question, right? I think so the first thing was, like I just said, was clarity. I'd probably say the second thing would be habits and like ordinary practices that bring you back to this side, as in the Christian definition and what that looks like in your context. Because I'd say, and then that being an anchoring foundation for you to walk on, regularly. So I'd say it's about long diligence, long obedience in the same direction, as Eugene Peterson says, because I feel like the temptation is to make it about vision and make it about big ideas and new processes. So like when I first started the business, I remember like thinking, okay, I'm a Christian, started this business, I have to give money to charity. I have to, donate to my tithe regularly, all these I have to build, there's a lot of philanthropic ideas, there's all these almost, they're all good things, but they're almost surface level. But I've found, yes, they matter, but if you start at the surface, you're not building a foundation that allows you to know Jesus and make him known. Because I feel like if I reflect back over the 12 years, most of the conversations I've had around Jesus have come from people being curious about because they've had a relationship with me over a long time, or they've observed a practice that I've withheld, or a consistency of behavior over a long time. And that sort of provoked curiosity for the gospel. So I'd say clarity was number one. Number two was get some good habits and spiritual practices, like ordinary practices that underpin it. And then thirdly, I'd say actually have time to wrestle with what you're doing and ask whether that is manifesting the gospel and that looks, there's too many examples of how that might look, but and ever in too many different businesses with many different industries, but it doesn't always look like a Bible study at your workplace or like a billboard, professing Christ. It just looks like a set of behaviors that challenge normal sets of behaviors where you've laid yourself down for the well-being of another person, because that's ultimately what the gospel is, Jesus dying for us to live. And I can give a ton of examples of how that's looked in my world, but they've never been like processes or anything particularly massive or innovative. They've often been small things.
Yeah. So if we even think about the clarity number, is that something that you established over time, the clear, this is my focus as a successful business person, this is what it looks like for me? Is that something that you did all in once and figured it out, or was that something that you worked out and figured out on as you went?
It's definitely something you go as you go. It's in the the scriptures talk about abiding. John, I can't remember, John, I'm the vine, you're the branch, it's John 15, right? It's and again, it's like a relationship. You don't predetermine how your marriage will look and then get married. You just get married and then have a set of underpinning practices like date nights and conversations and good communication that enable you to form a healthy marriage that will last, that allows, that to become what it was. So I think the business is the same way. I think where it fits into your life with God, it's the same thing. It's like asking the question, who is God? What is this teaching me about God? Which is the formative question. How is that changing me to be more like Christ? And how is this provoking curiosity for others to know Christ? And I think wrestling between those three questions on a regular basis will form what it looks like in your context over time. But I feel like we can almost, you can't steer a parked car. So if you just sit there at the beginning trying to work it out, you're just not going to ever drive the car. But I feel like in a weird way, It's in the as you go, where you're driving, but relating with God along the way and giving him that permission to challenge and change you. I think that's where the formation comes, and that's where the vision gets clearer.
Yeah. So when it comes to finance in business, let us clarify, business doesn't just mean owning your own business, but just, people who are working in just the marketplace, a general person. We can, all have these kind of perceptions and ways of thinking about how we work in these same concepts. But someone who is in the marketplace or a business person, isn't the Christian business ideal to earn as much as you can so that you can give as much as you can? Is that what our goal is for us, for Christians in business?
Yeah, like I think that's potentially a goal, but it's not the goal, right? Like, because I would say the Bible challenges us that the true treasure that we lay down our lives for is Christ and more of him, not more money, right? So the narrative you just stated, which is make more money to give more to the church. Well, guess what? The church doesn't need your money. Like, that's just the reality, because God is king of the earth, right? So I would say that that's true if that is what draws you nearer to him and gives you more of the true treasure, which is more of Christ. The scriptures constantly speak of, grace as the treasure, that we should seek after, which is his presence that fulfills all our needs and desires. So like, it's almost like we always start with that surface level action, and every surface level action can be framed in a way that's potentially beneficial to the church. But actually, at its core, it's what's making you love God more and know God more and making you more like God. Like, so if that example you just gave, it makes you love and know God more and helps you to make God known to others more, sure, that's one way. But I'd probably just say often we're a bit lazy in that we just go, oh yeah, this makes sense logically to me, which is like, I should make as much money as possible so I can give more money to the church. Well, in the same way, it can make as much sense if that's your narrative, than for you to suddenly go, well, I just want to make more money. And I don't have a relationship. I haven't spent any time with Jesus and I'm not on fire for the word, but I'm making a lot of money and giving money to the church. Like, God doesn't care about that. It doesn't, I think that's pretty clear in the scriptures. I don't think we need to debate that point, but I think it's a potential benefit of running a business for sure, but certainly not the goal.
Yeah, but what happens when you've felt the pressure from a pastor or a church leader to give a certain amount, or to give to this cause? Have you felt the pressure in an unhealthy way? And I guess how have you dealt with that expectation of you as a business person, a successful person, to give at a certain amount?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I wouldn't say I've ever felt the pressure to give a certain amount. I would say it's more of a, hey, you're a business and your company's really big and we're fundraising. Like, would you like to contribute to this? And I think that's a different form of pressure, in that in my head, I love that pastor, I love the church, and I can give. But I would say, I'm, and this is something I'm still learning, almost developing a framework for giving is separate to what is success in business. So I think that's just a separate framework. It has nothing to do with each other. Yes, maybe I have a disproportionate number of those conversations just because we present as wealthy. But every Christian should have a framework for giving over and above, what they feel convicted to give. Again, like with giving, there's almost two buckets. There's the habitual long obedience in the same direction giving, traditionally known as tithe, but whatever that is. And then there's, obviously, once-off gifts. And I would say I'm not an expert in that side yet. I'm working on that now, on what we can give to you. But I've never had an issue of saying to a pastor, like, if they're a godly person, like I'm not feeling it, really. I don't feel like, in reality, it's just, I don't feel like this is what I'm meant to be doing. Or I don't feel like the conviction for this cause. And I think we can often, like a mentor once said to me, like, when I was feeling this pressure, he said, like, oh, did you know, like, you're not God's answer to everyone's prayer? Like, and I think that was like powerful, because in a weird way, I thought, in my own hubris, thought that I was like, oh, so if I don't give, that thing's going to crumble. But in reality, like, God will provide the money, It's really about, how am I going with Jesus? And sometimes giving can be a form of surrender and humility, and take you to repentance and joyfully allow you to know God more and love God more. So in partnering that person in their mission. But equally, sometimes giving comes with strings, and it's feeding your own ego and your own hubris, which is pulling you away from Jesus. So same circumstance and same superficial outcome you're giving to this thing. But depending on where you're at on that pendulum with Jesus, it can be the right or wrong thing to do, all measured against the yardstick of Christ as your treasure, right? So I think that's what it sort of comes down to, discerning where you are and how you are, and what that giving in that moment will do for you, your relationship with Jesus.
Back to knowing about God, knowing God, and the provoking curiosity.
Yeah, well, like, what else is there?
What else is there? That's what's important.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's good. It's good to have that as the framework of how then you think of all these other important areas.
Well, because, like, I think we overcomplicate it. It's like as if a rich person has harder sets of decisions. It's not really. It's the same decision, just more dollars behind it. And so it's the same lived challenge, which is, how is this specific action? Is it it's either drawing me closer to Christ or pushing me away? And it's either teaching me more about Christ or teaching me more about something else. And it's either changing me to be more like Christ or changing me into something else. So it's formative in some way. And it's either drawing others to be curious about Christ or it's not. So it's pretty it's not overly, it's not overly complicated, but it's hard to live. It's hard to wrestle with in different contexts, but actually at its core, the fundamentals of becoming a Christian, like being a Christian, are not largely changing. Those things have been true for thousands of years. It's the death of Christ, right? The rising of Christ. But it's living them out in our cultural moment and in our context. And yes, businesses, I would say I'm more effective at reaching business people because I've wrestled with these things in my business context. But, everyone's got these same wrestles in their own context,
Have you witnessed or seen the side of Christian business done poorly?
Yeah, look, I think, I'm in like a community group of like CEOs, and it's interesting because you can register your beliefs and stuff. And I probably met 3 or 4 guys who were once Christians and are no longer practicing Christians. I wouldn't even say that they stopped identifying as Christians. It's more true that they just stopped considering God in anything they do because they're just too busy. And I think the reality is that's more, I'm just speaking anecdotally, I don't have research on this, but it tends to be more the way, like it's not done poorly because of something someone did or a moment someone decided. I feel like we like narratives that are like clean like that. But the reality is, just like most relationship breakdowns, they happen over time and there's nuance. And there might be triggers at the end that push you over the edge, but just like anyone who's been through a divorce and knows people who've gone through relational breakdown, it's nuance that happens. It's death by 1,000 cuts over a long time. In the same way, knowing Jesus is long obedience in the same direction. Leaving Jesus is long disobedience in the same direction, right? So I would say the people I would know it just starts with those small compromises. It's like, and you hear this, I'm saying this, like hearing myself say it, churches talk about this all the time, but it's literally like, they stop. They don't, mostly I would say they just haven't formed clarity on what the first question is, and they haven't devoted themselves to habits. And so what happens in business, usually, if your business is successful anyway, it sucks up all your time and it forms habits for you, just like any false god would. It demands your worship. And so worship is not like singing songs, it's spiritual practices. So like, oh, I'm held to these budgets or these financial pressures, and usually it's people complaining or HR issues. There's suddenly like a wave of small things that demand more of you, your identity. And then you're just living that way. And then in your margin, you're too tired, so you just sleep or watch Netflix. And then you're ended up, and then it's like 2 years and you're just formed into a secular business person because it's just dragged you that direction. And so like, that's usually what happens. It's not even anything on the surface, that I would see, like for most of the guys I know who have walked away, and they wouldn't have even, to be honest, these guys and girls might not even consider themselves not Christians now, but they just aren't practicing a relationship with Jesus. They don't go to church, don't read the Bibles, they don't talk, God isn't central to their life. They don't talk about him, they don't think about him, but they might have been a Christian once. So that tends to be the narrative as I've observed. And it was a huge warning sign for Linda and I when the company started being busier and bigger and life is constantly, sucking you up. It's that underpinning of that day-to-day abiding cadence that really centers you each day, and those spiritual practices.
Yeah. And I think whether, you're successful or not, like sometimes when you're not successful, you're just as, busy and hustling. So it's a danger for all of us that, and yeah, I mean, I guess you think that when you start getting successful, then things become easier. But as you attest, there's just more and more things to do. And so no matter what, you keep getting pulled in one direction.
Yeah. And it's not even like, it's funny, like it's not, I was talking to another board member the other day, and she was telling me, and she's a board member for like a listed company, like a giant multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. And she was saying the problem, it's not that there's less problems, it's just bigger. So you have more employees. And so you might have 0.01% of problems come to you, are serious enough to go to you. But by the time because you've got 20,000 employees, there's still a problem every day. And when it comes to you, it's serious enough that you have to deal with it and you've got to drop everything. So like, which is really interesting because, you kind of think, oh, it's bigger. We have more people, employed, so there's more management and governance. So there's less coming up to me. It's just not the case. There's more issues, and the issues that come up are more serious. And so like, it doesn't, if you let it, the business can engulf your entire world, so you really have to, again, bring it back. There's an infinite, I always joke, like there's an infinite amount of work that you can do, right? Like, so bringing it back to those kind of spiritual practices, I think are pretty critical.
Yeah. So then thinking about the provoking curiosity of the gospel, as we even just think about what mission is, how do you see mission in what you're doing and in the marketplace? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, like I really love the language of mission because, when I did Bible college, there were a few guys going to be missionaries. And I just always viewed it as something people went like something separate to conventional ministry. But I always wrestled with this tension of feeling called to run to start my business and run it. And I almost felt like, I was not living missionally. But until I kind of saw it through a new framing of like, oh, wait, this is within our city or within our culture, there is a subgroup that I'm effective with, and for me, that happens to be entrepreneurs and kind of CEO types. And I say effective where I mean, like I relate to and have empathy for them and have deep love for them. And I'm able to contextualize the gospel into their challenges. So I feel like mission is more about defining the people group you feel called to reach and where you have a deep love and a deep heart for that people group. And then living missionally means, okay, allowing your walk with Christ to inform how you present the gospel in that context to that people group in a way that it can be received. And so like for me, with entrepreneurs, the way I contextualize the gospel to them looks totally different to Linda, who feels called to mums, for example, for that stage of her life, So I think living missionally is actually comes back to intention and like actually going, who has God called me to be and who am I effective with? And now what does it look like? But it starts first though with those other things. You have to be missional with yourself, which is discipling yourself first before you can present it to others. Yeah. So like, yeah, I think, yeah, you know, that sort of mission for me is like actually like living with intention to a specific people group.
Yeah. And is there like a tension there between even just being like a CEO of a company and your role there, but then also like trying to be missional? How do you grapple with that tension?
Yeah, that was a big wrestle for me personally as the company grew, because I think when we started, I actually viewed my staff as my mission field because it was like my friends and we were small. So it was just sort of a lot of, you know, it was overlaid because these were my mates as well. But I think over time, I've realized that there's, you know, there's a power dynamic there where I'm their boss. And so in reality, I couldn't be an effective missionary without making them feel unsafe. You know, and what I felt crossing a line where, you know, I shouldn't be pushing my religious beliefs on my employees, you know, because I happy to debate that with anyone, but I personally felt uncomfortable creating an unsafe work environment for those people. And I felt it was crossing professional lines. But where I did notice was, so I wrestled with that for a few years, a bit of like almost, and when I brought in investment as well, it became more clear like that was not appropriate because I had obligations to investors as well as a board, as well as just people in the company. Not to say I encourage or discourage, I kind of quite agnostic to people's beliefs. I love and accept everyone. But because of the power dynamic, I felt like that was an ineffective environment for me to be a missionary. But where I was effective was other CEOs because I could share in their struggles and their pain. They weren't in my sphere of power, like they didn't work for me, but I could enter into their suffering and contextualize the gospel and how it was powerful for me in the same situation to them, and relate to them as people and as friends. And over time, provoke curiosity from my underpinning worldview, which led to conversations about the gospel. So I think the wrestle was really kind of, yeah, like what, as the company grew, what is appropriate, what is professional. And I can't say that's true for every context, every person, right? Because for some employees, their workplace is their mission field, and that's totally fine as well. But I felt like in my dynamic, that wasn't appropriate. Yeah. Again, a good starting point is, who do you empathize with, right? That's really what I feel like. Where can you enter into someone's pain, like, and really enter into it? Not sort of like, oh, I kind of hear they're going through a tough time, but like they've suffered as you've suffered, and they've overcome as you've overcome, right? And they could overcome as you've overcome in Christ. And I think that's how you know that's like a healthy people group, I feel.
Yeah. And that for you is like a mission field. Like that's the people you're seeking out and looking to actually enter into, rather than just, you know, you generally also just want to be kind and show God's love and mercy through just different situations in business as well and through life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that you've nailed that there. Like there's a baseline of holiness where you should just act with integrity and do the right thing, kind of like, and then on top of that, the mission field is where you're sort of then going out and actually evangelizing for lack of a better word.
I know. I obviously, being your friend, I've heard just different stories of you showing the gospel in how you actually are just living in just different situations. How would you, and I know like something about the changing the narrative of what people's perceptions is important for you. And so like how do you actually like think about that and embrace trying to live this holiness and think about changing that narrative in the different situations that you're in?
I think it's a better way to answer the question is maybe with an example. And I think because I'd say that it almost overstates the personal intention behind reframing the narrative. Like, I feel like I'd love to say I was so strategic that I would plan through every potential, moment and then like challenge that narrative. But in reality, it comes from a genuine overflow of me just loving Jesus and then wrestling with something in a moment. So I mean, probably a good example. There's so many, but I think probably the most appropriate example that I can share would be like I remember being trying to think whether that's sensitive information. I think I could share. Yeah, so one of the people that I know who I've been in business with, was getting sued, and I think and it was because of their largely their failure, and we'd met, I'd met my obligations to them from a legal perspective. And I remember being in my lawyer's office, and he was saying, his advice would be, our lawyers were saying, our advice would be to cut them loose effectively because you've already met, and let them handle that lawsuit themselves. And that was also the expectation of the person getting sued. They were like, yeah, you've helped me heaps, you can cut me loose. And then just something in the moment, I just felt like, and our lawyers are saying that, and everyone was saying that that's the narrative, which is what you do in this situation, because we'd already settled things on our end. This was something that they were responsible for, which they owned. And I'm not saying this is a principle that should be followed generally, just saying in that moment with a bunch of context behind it, I felt like, oh, look, I'd been helping them with the lawsuit and I was better equipped, and I felt like they hadn't done anything wrong actually, long term. And so I kind of said, oh, look, but at the same time, I didn't want to drag our company through it because that's not right by our investors. Although they would have gladly supported me as well because this person worked with us. So, but I kind of said, well, to our lawyer, well, I think what I'll do is we'll get rid of it from our company's issues so that our investors aren't dragged in. But I'll personally support the person, with the lawsuit because I've been managing it for them, and it's not really fair to cut them loose. Like, they just don't know anything about it. And I kind of more just said that flippantly, but that provoked a gospel conversation with my lawyer and with one of my investors, because they were like, why would you do that? You're exposing yourself to financial suffering, as a result. Now, it wasn't a massive lawsuit, so it's not like it was going to bankrupt me or anything, but I was like, oh, so I might lose some money. Like, I'd rather do the right thing and lose some money. That was probably how I kind of framed it to them. And I don't mean I'm flippant about money. I just meant the amount of money we would have lost in losing the lawsuit was manageable for me and Linda personally. I discussed it with Linda first. I didn't just do it, but she was like, yeah, that's the right thing to do by every party. And it resulted in personal loss, but it was right by our investors because it wasn't fair that they got dragged into this because it had nothing to do with them. It was right by the person because I'd been managing it for them and helping them in relationship for a long time. And it was right by, it was counter to our lawyer's advice. It was interesting because no one expected that outcome, but everyone knew it was the right thing to do in the context we were in. And that's a weird way of in the moment challenging your narrative, because that no one expected us to behave in a way that was selfless, where we would lose for someone else to gain. Now, and in a weird way, that's the gospel played out because it's me dying for someone else to live, in the same way that Jesus laid down his life with no expectation of return because it was right. Now, I don't think you can do that all the time, but I think in that moment I discerned that that was the right thing to do. But it led to gospel conversations, and and I'm okay as an outcome. And even if I wasn't, it's not just about making more money. So if the goal was to make more money, that would be the wrong thing to do, because there's no way you make more money out of this. But if the goal is to get more of Christ and bring others to Christ, and learn and repent and learn more about myself and whether I cared too much about money, then that decision created all those things for me. I was able to realize, I should just do the right thing. And I didn't get any notoriety from it. No one knew about it, only kind of those involved. And so I feel like it passed all the gospel tests, but failed on the commercial test. And I think, but it challenged a narrative. So I'd say that's not a process you could teach or roll out. It's not even a mental model that you can apply as a principle, because I would say if you did that every time, you'd be bankrupt. You know what I mean? But in that context, it was just right. And that comes from that wrestling daily talking to Jesus, because I think there are a million other times where I probably wouldn't have done the same. Well, potentially in other contexts, they're all different. No two contexts are exactly the same, right? So that's just an example of it challenged people's thinking, which resulted in a provoked curiosity, because it was surprising to them, the decision, but yet it felt right for them also. And
yeah, it's beautiful. Nice. Well, lastly, what opportunities? I know you're a bit of a cultural thinker as well. Keep up to date with what's happening around in the culture around us. What do you see are the opportunities as Christians in business or in the marketplace in the current cultural environment? What opportunities are before us?
I think in this moment, I was listening to a really good podcast from the Yale Center for Political Divinity, and it was talking about this moment as we view it as a moment of secularization, where people are becoming less Christian. But I would the challenge of this podcast was saying it's actually a deinstitutionalization across the board, irrespective of religion. So the examples are, there is no institution that isn't being torn down right now. Government is lower trust than ever. Media, lower trust than ever. The financial system, lower trust than ever. Companies are being held to an almost holy standard of account, but lower trust than ever. And churches and religious institutions, lowest trust than ever. So it's a macro tearing down of institutions. But in that, I feel like there's opportunity in the sense that people are more leaning on individual relationships and are therefore more, and I think maybe this has always been the case, but where are people going to hear about the gospel? It's not from the institutions necessarily anymore. They're going to hear about it from humans and humans who know them. And in a weird way, that's how it was always meant to be. The church was just a collective of humans doing that, en masse. But the reality is there's a real space here for people to be open to new ideas, because they're tearing down the kind of fundamental institutions of their old ideas. So I think there's more openness to new ideas, and there's more openness to deep relationships, because people are lonelier than ever before. There was a study, and don't quote me on this, but there was a study I read that on average, the average Australian millennial has 1.9 friends, where a friend was defined as, I can't remember how they defined it, but basically knowing someone deeply, which is jack all, not enough friends, right? So people are more open to deep relationships. And I think people also want authenticity as a result of that, because institutional, they don't have trust in institutions, they're lonely, so they want more genuine relationships. And so I think the challenge for us is to meet that need, in the sense of we need to be informed of our beliefs. Because when I was in a room last week, and I was at a secular CEO conference, and they had a Buddhist monk speaking for a whole session. And then afterwards, they were asking me, I said I'm a Christian, and they were asking, well, that's, once they got over it, because I'm probably the only Christian in the room. But they, I kind of explained to them the difference is I don't disagree with a lot of the practices the person was advocating for. And I think there's Christian support for some of those practices, like silence and solitude practices and that sort of thing. But at the core of Christianity is that God is sentient, knowable, and he's good, he loves us, and he's all powerful. And if that's all true, then it changes how you live. And it was interesting, because that in itself was a new idea to all these people. And because they're so far removed from core Christian doctrines now, even though we're a Judeo-Christian society. So actually old ideas can be positioned as new ideas that can provoke interesting conversations. And I feel like if we spend the time to invest in our own knowledge of core doctrine, we spend the time on relationships with people to have those open conversations, there's an opportunity for mission, because we can present old ideas as new, in a new context. And that led to some cool conversations. I'm not saying I became a Christian, but no one reacted badly to what I said. They had never even heard that explanation of Christian religion before, which is crazy, because it's just the basics, So I think there's opportunity there for that. But I think the mistake is we want it to be fast. I think the opportunity of inviting people to an institution where they hear a rock concert and hear an inspiring message and put up their hand and fall on the floor, I think that's probably gone. But it feels like it's back to grassroots, organic, one-on-one, genuine relationships. That's exciting in its own way.
Yeah, it's good. Love that. Nice. Well, we're going to finish there. But before we do, just be nice, maybe if you want to pray for our church and pray for, us in people who are in just their workplace, they would have this missional life. So can you pray for us, Ben?
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks.
Father in heaven, just thank you so much that we can come and gather and think about the deep things that are you and how we can know you more, love you more in our daily lives and in our own personal contexts. Pray for every person listening, whatever it is they're going through in their own situation. I pray that your gospel will make itself revealed in their own unique situation. Help them to connect with you in a deeper way, love you more, and in turn, live out their own faith in their own situations. Pray for people's hearts that they'll soften, their ears that they'll hear, whatever you have to say to them through this conversation. We surrender it to you. In your mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful. Love you, mate.
Cool.